of using this particular plotter, which is to plot visibility data as a function of time. And by using something called a composer node, we can gather the data from a whole bunch of different sources together. In our particular case, the data from a whole bunch of baselines with all telescopes in a synthesis array. And we want to try and get essentially an overview of what's been happening with these as a function of time. This is one of our standard sorts of observations where we had 480 data points, and each of the visibilities in our array, we see a summary of for each of the 480 data points on each baseline, where we have essentially compressed all the data in frequency and taken essentially the average of data for the say number of frequencies in the observation. So essentially it represents a continuum observation now. Now in our particular case, there's some very strange data in here I don't understand, but it's good enough for our demo. What we've actually done is already process the data and put it up on the display. Each of our little tabs here gives you shows you something up to 64 different baselines. And you can tab through the whole array and see how things have changed for each group of data, for example. Now, the other thing that we can do is we know that, again, with our right context menu, visibility data, of course, has amplitude and phase, or real and imaginary. The default way to look at things is with amplitude, but you can change, for example, just to select the real component, by going over here and clicking on, there we are, on the reals. It comes up with a different color. And also, you'll notice here that we have a little offset slider which we can use to move these data closer or further apart. And by default, when we brought these data up on the screen, the offset was changed from one value to another. For example, if you put the data down, or bring the slider down, we're going to bring our data together. That can be useful if you want to just get a complete plot of everything on top of each and look to see which is the real outlier. Let's bring them back up here. Okay, let's go back to amplitude. Now, one of the other things that we can do is we can say, okay, not only do we have real and imaginary, but of course with a visibility data set we have the parallel hands and the which are generally vels numbers 0 and 3 for each of these subsets, and the crossed hands are 1 and 2. So if we go from going from 0 to 1, we should see the offset value here, and it did. So we know we're now looking at some kind of polarized crosshand, I believe. The other thing you can also do, for example, is if you're eager to see some, or you see some exciting structure on some particular baseline here, you can, with your middle mouse button, you can click on that particular baseline and you'll get a little pop-up window which we can then expand just the same way as we have with other ones, which gives us a more detailed view of this particular baseline. Now, by default, when we get the pop-up window, we show things with, on the left-hand side of this is the real data, that's that line. On the right-hand side, this scale is associated with the imaginary data, that's this data. Again, with our context menu, we can show the data, select to show the data as amplitude phase. And then, as noticeable, our data shape here is similar to the kind of summary data set display shown in the main plot. So that's a useful feature you can use to zoom in and look at data in more detail. Now, I don't think there's any in this data set. I don't think we have any, but there is an option there, for example, to show flag data. Now, if I click on this mouse button, if there was a lot of flag data which by default is hidden in these displays, then the data would pop up, but I don't think too much in this particular case, unfortunately. Anyway, that is a brief overview of the kinds of things you can do with a collections plotter. Oleg will probably give you some more examples of demonstrations of this thing in different contexts during the course of the workshop.